The High Sierras stretch over 700 miles from the southern border of Yosemite National Park all the way south to the California-Nevada state line. It's an absolutely breathtaking stretch of jagged peaks, deep valleys, and glistening lakes and rivers that draw close to 4 million visitors each year. But don't be fooled by its popularity, because this area is not for the faint of heart. The High Sierras offer no shortage of challenges, from extreme weather to rugged terrain, and it is certainly not a place where you want to get lost or injured. So if you're planning a trip into the backcountry of the High Sierras, here are some things you must know to survive. First thing you need to know is that you have to prepare for unpredictable weather. A storm can move in at any time in the High Sierras, which can bring heavy rain, lightning, hail, snow, and high winds. Temperatures can fluctuate wildly, often changing 20 degrees between areas of sun and shade. At higher elevations, temperatures can easily dip below freezing even during the summer months. And that means you need to be prepared for anything. During the summer, it can actually get pretty hot in the lower elevations, so you'll want to pack light, long-sleeve shirts and a good hat to protect yourself from the sun. But then once you gain some elevation, it will cool off considerably. So you definitely want to have some warmer clothes like a fleece or down jacket. And then finally, even if you're going in the middle of summer, you should always pack a full winter jacket. You never know when a storm is going to roll in. Also, remember that at higher elevations, temperatures can be 10 to 15 degrees colder than the areas below. The next thing you need to know is that the weather isn't just wildly fluctuating, but it can also change quickly. That means that conditions can go from perfect to dangerous in a matter of minutes. For example, a storm could roll in while you lay out on the trail, and the temperature could drop below freezing. This can be especially dangerous if you're not prepared for it. Hypothermia can set in quickly in these conditions, so it's important to have the right gear and know how to use it. So make sure you have a good waterproof jacket and a hat and gloves. And then learn how to put on and take off your pack without having to take off your jacket. That way you can stay dry and warm in one layer. Speaking of storms, the next thing you need to know is that thunderstorms are common in the High Sierras, especially during the summer months. And they can be very dangerous. Lightning is obviously a big risk, but the other thing that thunderstorms can bring is flash floods. When the thunderstorms hit the granite of the High Sierras, it can cause flash floods in the river valleys. In the mountains, the water can rise extremely fast and can easily sweep you off your feet. So if there's any chance of thunderstorms in the forecast, you need to make sure you know what to do if a flash flood warning is issued. One thing you can do is avoid camping in the river valleys. Instead, try to find higher ground. Another thing you can do is make sure you have a plan for getting out of the area if a flash flood warning is issued. Remember, the water can rise extremely fast and it can be very dangerous. The next thing you need to know is that the High Sierras can be extremely dry. There is not a lot of vegetation in this area, and that means there is not a lot of places to get water. So you need to make sure you bring enough water with you. How much water you need will depend on how hard you're hiking and the weather, but a good rule of thumb is to bring at least 2 liters of water per person per day. You should also have a way to filter or purify water in case you need to find additional sources along the trail. Remember, it's easy to underestimate how much water you really need when you're out in the backcountry. So make sure you're prepared. Next, you need to know that finding water isn't the only challenge you'll face when it comes to staying hydrated. There's also the issue of altitude. The High Sierras are home to some of the tallest peaks in the contiguous United States. And as you gain elevation, your body will start to feel the effects of altitude sickness. One of the symptoms of altitude sickness is dehydration. That's because the air is thinner at higher elevations, so it's harder for your body to absorb oxygen. This means you'll start to lose fluids through your sweat and urine. And if you're not careful, you can get dehydrated. Again, make sure you're bringing enough water with you, and then watch for the signs of altitude sickness. If you do start to feel sick, the best thing to do is to rest and drink plenty of fluids. You can also try to slowly acclimate to the altitude by spending a few days at lower elevations before you start your hike. The next thing you need to know is that you can expect stunning views around every corner in the High Sierras. It is hard to describe the feeling of being surrounded by some of the most beautiful scenery in the world. The granite peaks seem to go on forever, and the valleys below are filled with lush green forests and sparkling lakes. It's truly breathtaking. But let's be honest, all this beauty can be a little distracting. It's easy to get lost in the scenery and not pay attention to where you're going. Make sure you stay focused on the trail and don't wander off. Remember, you're in some very rugged terrain, and you don't want to get lost or injured. Speaking of getting lost, the next thing you need to know is that cell phone service is spotty at best in the high Sierras. There are some areas where you can get a signal, but they're few and far between. This means that if you do get lost or injured, it might be difficult to call for help. That's why it's important to be prepared before you head out on your hike. Let someone know where you're going and when you plan on returning. And then make sure you have a map and compass and know how to use them. Also, consider bringing a GPS device with you on your hike. This way, if you do get lost, search and rescue will be able to track your last known location. Another thing you need to know is that the high Sierras are home to a variety of wildlife, some of which can be dangerous. Bears are probably the most iconic animal in the high Sierras, but they can be a nuisance and even deadly if they feel threatened. Make sure you take all the necessary precautions to stay safe, like storing your food properly and making noise while you're hiking. Other animals you might encounter include black bears, mountain lions, coyotes, and snakes. Most of these animals will avoid humans, but again, they can be dangerous if they feel threatened. Make sure you know what to do if you encounter a wild animal, and always give them plenty of space. And finally, the last thing you need to know is that the high Sierras are a wilderness area. This means that there are no services or amenities available in the backcountry. You need to be completely self-sufficient. No one is coming to save you if you get hurt or if you run out of supplies. That's why it's so important to be prepared before you head out on your hike. Make sure you have everything you need to stay safe and comfortable. And then know your limits and don't push yourself beyond them. The high Sierras are a challenging environment, but they're also absolutely breathtaking. If you're prepared and know what to expect, you're in for an adventure you'll never forget. In this video, we're going to cover everything that you need to know about footwear for winter hiking. This is your host. And let's get into it. The first thing I want to talk about is footwear. Footwear is super important when it comes to winter hiking. The last thing you want is to have wet and cold feet in the wintertime. It is not a fun experience. So today, we're gonna be talking about what type of footwear you should be wearing and also the different accessories like guiders, microspikes, and crampons. All these things are going to help to keep your feet safe and warm while you're out there on the trail. Now, if you do end up getting wet and cold feet, make sure to check out my video on how to rehydrate your boots because you want to make sure to take care of your boots properly. Also, you might want to check out my video on how to choose the right socks for winter hiking because that is also going to play a role in keeping your feet nice and toasty. Alright, so let's start off by talking about footwear. Now, in terms of footwear, I always recommend wearing a sturdy boot, something that has good ankle support. You want something that is going to keep your foot secure and stable. In the wintertime, you're often going to encounter icy conditions. You might also encounter some pretty rocky terrain. You don't want to be wearing something like running shoes or trail runners, even if they have good traction. You're going to want something more sturdy and supportive than that. So, I would always recommend a proper hiking boot. Now, the boot itself needs to have good traction. It needs to have good grip. You don't want to be slipping and sliding all over the place. So look for something with a good lug pattern on the bottom. You can also add traction devices such as microspikes or crampons, but more on that later in the video. The other thing you want to make sure of is that your boot has good ankle support. Again, you're going to be dealing with slippery and icy conditions. You don't want to twist your ankle, and then you're stuck out on a trail somewhere. So, you want to make sure that you have the proper support. Another thing to consider is whether or not you want a high-top boot or a low-top boot. A high-top boot is going to provide more support, and it is also going to provide more warmth. Now, I tend to prefer low-top boots myself. However, if you are new to winter hiking or if you are going to be traveling through some really deep snow, I would recommend going with a higher top boot. Personally, I prefer a low-top boot because I like the flexibility and I like the nimbleness. I feel like I can move around better in them. However, again, that is personal preference. Whatever you choose, just make sure that it fits well and it is comfortable. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is whether or not you should be wearing waterproof boots. Now, there is some debate on this one. Some people swear by waterproof boots and other people say, no, you don't want waterproof boots, you want boots that are water resistant. Now, personally, I wear waterproof boots because I like the extra layer of protection. However, if you are planning on hiking in really cold temperatures, I would not go with a fully waterproof boot because that can sometimes trap moisture and your foot can end up sweating more. So if it's really, really cold out, I would go with a boot that is more water resistant. However, if you are hiking in temperatures above freezing and especially if there is a chance of rain, sleet or snow, I would definitely opt for a waterproof boot. Now, in addition to footwear, you also want to think about wearing gaiters. Gaiters are basically a piece of material that covers the top of your boot and it helps to keep debris out. It also helps to keep water out. They're really helpful if you're hiking in really snowy conditions. And personally, I always wear gaiters. I always put them over the top of my pants and then I put my boots inside of the gaiters. That way, no matter what, no snow is getting in my boots. If you hike enough in the winter time, eventually you're going to find yourself post-holing. So if you do end up post-holing, it is nice to have that extra layer of protection with the gaiters so that snow isn't getting down into your boots. Now, I want to talk about traction devices. So we've already talked about microspikes. I mentioned those earlier in the video, but now I want to talk about crampons. Crampons are basically a traction device that you attach to the bottom of your boot. They have sharp points that dig into the ice or the snow, which helps you to have better traction. Now, microspikes and crampons can be confusing. So let me break it down for you. Microspikes are best used when there is some snow and ice present, but it is not too deep. They're great for walking on icy sidewalks. They're also great for walking on packed snow and trails. They're not meant to be used in deeper snow or in really icy conditions. You would use crampons for that. Now, crampons come into basic designs. There is the type that straps on and then there is the type that is more like a shoe that you slide your boot into. Now, if you plan on doing any serious winter hiking, I would recommend getting a pair of crampons. Now, this is just going to depend on where you live and what type of hiking that you do. But I live in an area where there is lots of ice and lots of snow. And I find crampons to be really, really helpful. I will say that if you are going to be using crampons, you want to make sure that your boots are compatible with crampons. Now, most modern-day boots are, but it doesn't hurt to check just in case. One thing to keep in mind when you are looking at crampons or microspikes is that they do come in different sizes. You want to make sure that you get the right size for your boot. I have a pretty hard time finding boots that fit because I wear a half size. So when it comes to microspikes and crampons, they typically only come in whole sizes. So, it's always best to size up. So I always wear a large in crampons and microspikes even though I wear a 7.5 shoe size. The next thing I want to talk about is poles. Now, I'm not talking about trekking poles. I'm actually talking about ice axes. An ice axe is a tool that you use for balance and traction when you're hiking in really icy and snowy conditions. An ice axe is basically a pick that you stick into the snow or the ice and it gives you leverage. It also helps you to stop yourself from slipping. Now, I have another video on how and why to use your ice axe. So make sure to check that out if you're interested. An ice axe is not something that you need, but it is definitely something that can be helpful. Again, it's going to depend on where you hike and what type of conditions that you hike in. If you're hiking on trails that have steeper declines and there's lots of ice and snow, then an ice axe would definitely be beneficial. If you are hiking on flatter terrain or you're hiking in less icy conditions, you probably won't need an ice axe. But again, it never hurts to have one. It's better to be prepared and have one and not need it than to be stuck in a situation where you need one and you don't have it. So now that we've covered the basics of footwear, let's talk about layering. Layering is super important when it comes to staying warm in the wintertime. Make sure to check out my video on winter hiking and the 3-layer system to make sure that you are staying nice and toasty while you're out on the trail. And remember, no matter what gear that you have on, you want to make sure that you are dressed appropriately for the weather. If it is really, really cold out, make sure that you have a base layer, a mid layer and a shell. And if it's not as cold, maybe you can just get away with a base layer and a mid layer. But always make sure that you are dressing appropriately for the weather. Leave any questions that you have down below in the comments. And make sure to check out my other videos on winter hiking. Thanks for watching. Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of Tips and Tricks. One of the most important things when it comes to through hiking is to have a lightweight base weight. The gear that you carry on your body is one part of that equation, but what you put in your pack is equally as important. One thing I try to keep in mind is that every decision I make with my gear or food has opportunity cost. In other words, if I choose to carry something, then I'm not carrying something else. So when it comes to what we pack inside our packs, we want to be very deliberate about those decisions and make sure we're not wasting space on unnecessary items. Today we're going to cover what I think are the two biggest culprits when it comes to overloading packs, and that is too much water and too much food. Now there are some exceptions to every rule, and these rules are no different. But let's talk about them now. I would say hydration is probably one of the easiest things to overpack on trail. And that's because of how easy it is to carry extra water. These days, most packs have dedicated water bottle pockets that are easily accessible and hold large volumes of water. Additionally, bladders have become very popular and many packs are now compatible with them. With increased use of these systems, it's really easy to load up on a bunch of extra water. Now, the amount of water you carry is going to vary based on a number of factors such as the time of year, where you are in the country and how many hours you'll be hiking between camps. I've seen people carry anywhere from 2 liters all the way up to 6 or more liters of water. Most of the time this is unnecessary. Even during summer months in desert areas, most through hikers will carry at least 1 liter of water and then refill along the way. There are plenty of places to get water out on trail, and even when there isn't, you can use a filter or purification system to make almost any natural water source drinkable. This means you should need more than 1 liter of water, unless you're planning on hiking for several days without getting to a reliable water source. When it comes to your water reservoir, I prefer to carry a bladder instead of bottles. I find it easier to hydrate when I am moving and it takes up less space inside my pack. However, I only carry 1 liter. You might see some people carrying 2 or more liters of water, but this again is usually unnecessary. If you are concerned about running low on water, you can always fill up your bladder at camp or along the trail and then refill your water bottle later if needed. As an added tip, remember that ice adds weight and takes up space in your pack. So when filling up your bladder or water bottles, try to keep ice to a minimum or just drink it as you go. Instead of putting ice cubes in your water bottle, use electrolyte powder or tablets to keep your water cold. This will help reduce the amount of weight and space you need to keep your water cool. It's also important to remember that you should always treat water before drinking it, even if it looks clean. Boiling water kills most harmful bacteria and parasites, but it doesn't eliminate all of them. Using a filter or purification system is the best way to remove all contaminants and make the water safe to drink. Remember, you can use your filter or purification system to collect water from various sources such as springs, streams, and even rainwater. It's essential to stay hydrated while on trail, but you don't need to carry more than 1 liter of water unless absolutely necessary. Staying hydrated is crucial for maintaining energy levels and overall health while hiking. Dehydration can lead to fatigue, headaches, and more serious complications. However, overpacking with water can also cause problems. Carrying too much water can lead to dehydration because it can be difficult to drink enough to replace the fluids lost through sweat. Additionally, it can put unnecessary strain on your body, leading to discomfort and injury. The next item that people often overpack is food. After all, food is what fuels our bodies and gives us the energy we need to push forward day after day. But when it comes to through hiking, it is important to be mindful of the weight of the food we carry as well as its storage space inside our packs. No one wants to be weighed down by unnecessary calories or struggle to fit their daily meals into their pack. That is why it is essential to find the right balance between having enough food and not carrying too much. The key is to find lightweight foods that are high in calories so you get the most bang for your buck. Some great examples include things like freeze-dried meals, which are lightweight and very calorie-dense. They're also relatively easy to prepare, which can be a big plus when you're tired and hungry after a long day of hiking. Other options include things like nuts and dried fruit, which are lightweight and high in calories as well. Plus, they can be eaten on the go, which is convenient when you're short on time. For snacks, consider things like beef or fish jerky, which are high in protein and shelf-stable. Hard candies and gummies are good for a quick sugar fix and can be useful for electrolytes. Lastly, instant breakfast and oatmeal are great options for adding calories and can be prepared quickly with just a little bit of water. In addition to considering the weight and calorie count of your food, it's also important to think about the space it takes up in your pack. That's why it's a good idea to repackage your food into smaller containers to save space. For example, you could transfer your nuts and dried fruit into small Ziploc bags instead of carrying the whole bag with you. You can also do the same thing with things like hard candies or gummies. Not only will this help you save space, but it will also help you avoid carrying unnecessary weight. It's a simple strategy, but it can make a big difference when you're trying to optimize the amount of gear you're carrying. Ultimately, the amount of food you need to carry will depend on a number of factors such as the length of your hike and your own caloric needs. In general, though, you want to aim for around 2,000 to 3,000 calories per day. That's around half a pound to 3/4 of a pound of food per day. Of course, some days you may need more and some days you may need less, but this is a good target range to aim for. By following these tips and being mindful of both the weight and the space your food takes up in your pack, you can ensure that you have enough to fuel your body without being weighed down by unnecessary calories. Through hiking is all about finding the right balance, and that includes the food you eat. So remember, choose wisely and happy trails. When it comes to food, it is important to strike a balance between carrying enough to sustain you throughout your hike and not packing too much unnecessary weight. Fortunately, there are plenty of lightweight, high-calorie foods available that can help you do just that. For example, freeze-dried meals are a great option as they're lightweight, calorie-dense and easy to prepare. Nuts and dried fruit are also excellent choices, offering a healthy snack that won't weigh you down. By opting for these types of foods, you can ensure that you have the energy you need to keep moving forward without being burdened by excess weight. In addition to choosing the right foods, it's also helpful to repackage your food into smaller containers to save space in your pack. By doing so, you can streamline your food storage and ensure that you have easy access to the snacks and meals you need throughout the day. Overall, finding the right balance when it comes to food is key to a successful through hike. By choosing lightweight, high-calorie foods and repackaging them in a way that saves space, you can stay fueled and energized without